Just hours ago, during the night of March 29th into March 30th, 2026, an Iranian missile struck the Neot Hovav industrial zone in southern Israel, roughly 13 kilometers south of Beersheba. The primary target was the Adama Maktashem chemical plant, a major production facility specializing in pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other crop protection chemicals that play a vital role in Israel's agriculture sector and export economy. The strike triggered a large and intense fire that burned for several hours, sending thick black smoke billowing high into the night sky. Israeli authorities quickly issued urgent public warnings about potential hazardous material leaks and advised residents within an 800-meter radius to stay indoors and keep windows closed. Over 30 firefighting crews, supported by specialized hazardous materials response teams, worked through the night to contain the blaze and prevent any major toxic release. While the Israeli Environmental Protection Ministry later issued an all-clear stating there was no immediate widespread public danger from chemical leaks, the incident sparked widespread concern across southern Israel and drew international attention due to the sensitive nature of the facility. This strike stands out because it represents a noticeable and deliberate evolution in Iran's targeting strategy during the ongoing conflict with Israel. In the early weeks of the war, Iranian missile and drone attacks were largely directed at population centers in central Israel, or symbolic military sites, with the apparent goal of generating maximum media attention and psychological pressure on the Israeli public. In recent days, however, a clear pattern has emerged. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is shifting toward more selective strikes on industrial, chemical, and economic infrastructure. The attack on the Adama Maktashem plant in the Neot Hovav industrial zone is the most prominent and strategically significant example of this new approach. Welcome to World Conflict Report. In this comprehensive 42-minute in-depth analysis, we will examine Iran's new target strategy in extensive detail. We will explore the specific reasons behind the pivot to industrial and chemical facilities, the tactical, economic, and political advantages this approach provides to Iran, how it fits into the broader month-long war, the precise damage caused in the Beersheba incident, the Israeli and American responses so far, the role of proxy forces, and the long-term strategic implications of this change for the future trajectory of the conflict. The war that erupted on February 28, 2026, marked a dramatic escalation in the long-standing tensions between Iran and Israel. What began as targeted Israeli and American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo quickly expanded into a sustained air campaign against missile production plants, command and control centers, underground bases, and logistics hubs. Over the past 30 days, hundreds of precision airstrikes have been conducted by Israeli and U.S. forces. Israeli officials have claimed significant success, stating that they have disabled or destroyed between 60% and 70% of Iran's known ballistic missile launchers and a substantial portion of its production capacity. The primary objective was to severely limit Iran's ability to launch effective long-range attacks against Israeli population centers and strategic assets, thereby restoring deterrence and reducing the immediate threat to Israeli civilians. Despite this intensive degradation campaign, Iran has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience. Rather than collapsing under pressure or limiting itself to symbolic responses, the IRGC has modified its operational approach. Instead of continuing only with high-volume barrages aimed at population centers for psychological effect, Iran is now selectively targeting economic and industrial assets. The strike on the Neot Hovav chemical complex near Beersheba is the clearest and most consequential example of this strategic pivot to date. The plant is part of a larger industrial zone that produces a significant share of Israel's agricultural chemicals and also handles hazardous waste disposal. Damaging it creates immediate economic disruption, potential environmental risks, and long-term supply chain problems for Israeli agriculture and related industries. Why is Iran making this strategic shift at this stage of the war? Several interconnected factors provide a clear explanation. First, after suffering heavy losses to its fixed launch sites and production facilities from the sustained Israeli-American air campaign, Iran is now conserving its remaining mobile and underground assets for higher-value targets that can deliver disproportionate strategic impact. A single well-placed missile on a chemical plant can cause months or even years of disruption, far exceeding the immediate physical damage of a strike on a conventional military base. Second, industrial and chemical facilities are often more difficult to defend comprehensively than pure military installations. They have large physical footprints, multiple vulnerable points, and cannot be fully protected by point defense systems like Iron Dome or Arrow, which are optimized for specific threat profiles. Third, striking such targets generates environmental and public health concerns that attract significant international attention and place political pressure on Israel. Fourth, it forces Israeli decision-makers into a difficult strategic dilemma: how to respond effectively without escalating the conflict to strikes on Iranian civilian-adjacent infrastructure, which could result in higher civilian casualties and increased international criticism. The Niyot Hovav Industrial Zone, where the Adama Maktesh plant is located, is one of Israel's most important chemical manufacturing hubs. The facility produces active ingredients for a wide range of crop protection products and is part of a larger complex that includes hazardous waste disposal sites. When the Iranian missile, or debris from an intercepted projectile, according to some Israeli reports, struck the site, it ignited a large and persistent fire. Thick black smoke was visible for many kilometers, and local authorities initially warned residents to remain indoors due to fears of hazardous material leaks. Firefighting crews, numbering over 30 teams, and supported by specialized hazardous materials units, worked intensively through the night to bring the blaze under control. The Israeli Environmental Protection Ministry later issued an all-clear, stating there was no immediate widespread public danger from toxic leaks. However, the incident raised serious concerns about the vulnerability of such facilities and the potential for long-term environmental and economic consequences if similar strikes continue. This strike fits into a broader emerging pattern. In recent days, Iran has also targeted steel plants, aluminum complexes, and other industrial sites in retaliation for Israeli strikes on its own factories. Senior IRGC commanders have publicly stated that they will respond to attacks on Iranian infrastructure by targeting equivalent strategic industries linked to Israel and its allies. By shifting focus from purely military or symbolic targets to economic infrastructure, Iran is attempting to impose sustained long-term costs that are difficult for Israel to absorb or quickly repair. From a tactical perspective, this new strategy offers several clear advantages. Cluster warheads, which have been used in a high percentage of recent barrages, create multiple small impacts over a wide area, significantly complicating interception efforts and increasing the probability of hitting vulnerable sections of large industrial complexes. The Sigil's solid fuel missile, with its rapid launch readiness and mid-flight maneuvering capabilities, has emerged as a key platform in these operations. It allows Iran to launch quickly from mobile or underground positions, reducing the window available for Israeli preemptive strikes. Iran's deliberate choice of chemical plants is particularly calculated. These facilities support both civilian agriculture and, in some cases, have potential dual-use applications. By striking them, Iran can maintain a narrative of targeting legitimate strategic assets while simultaneously creating real and lasting economic disruption. This strategic shift also reflects a deeper recognition by Iranian leadership that they cannot win a direct military confrontation through sheer volume of missiles alone. After losing a large portion of their fixed launch infrastructure, Iran is now prioritizing efficiency and impact. They are using their remaining mobile assets more intelligently and selecting targets that deliver outsized economic and psychological effects relative to the resources expended. On the Israeli side, this new target strategy creates significant new challenges for defense planning. Protecting every industrial site, chemical plant, and economic facility across the country is logistically and financially impossible with current resources. The Israel Defense Forces must now carefully balance the protection of population centers with the need to safeguard economic assets that are critical for long-term national resilience and food security. The Beersheba strike also raises important questions about the practical effectiveness of the Arrow and David's sling systems when facing lower altitude or fragmented threats from cluster warheads and missile debris. The broader strategic implications of this shift are profound and far-reaching. By deliberately targeting chemical and industrial facilities, Iran is sending a clear signal that it has the capability and willingness to impose sustained economic costs on Israel and its allies. This approach raises the stakes for any Israeli retaliation. If Israel chooses to respond by striking Iranian oil refineries, power generation facilities, or other economic infrastructure, the conflict could rapidly evolve into a phase of mutual infrastructure destruction, a highly dangerous escalation ladder that both sides have so far attempted to avoid, but is becoming increasingly difficult to prevent. The growing involvement of proxy forces adds yet another dangerous dimension to the situation. The Houthis in Yemen have now launched direct missile and drone attacks on Israel, effectively opening a southern front. Hezbollah continues to maintain a high state of readiness along the northern border, posing a constant threat of a second major front. Iran's evolving strategy appears designed to create multiple simultaneous pressure points, forcing Israel to stretch its defensive resources thin while continuing to strike high-value economic targets in the central region. Economically, the consequences of this new targeting approach are already extending well beyond Israel's borders. Disruptions to chemical production capacity affect agricultural supply chains, both regionally and globally. When combined with the ongoing restrictions and heightened security risks in the Strait of Hormuz, these strikes contribute to increased volatility in commodity prices and rising insurance costs for shipping and industrial operations throughout the region. This new target strategy also carries important political and diplomatic dimensions. By focusing on industrial and chemical facilities, Iran can argue that it is striking legitimate strategic assets rather than purely civilian targets, potentially mitigating some international criticism. At the same time, it places significant pressure on Israeli political leadership to craft a response that appears measured and proportionate rather than excessively escalatory. In the coming days and weeks, we are likely to see Israel intensify its strikes on remaining Iranian missile production facilities and mobile launchers. The critical question that remains is whether Israel will also begin targeting Iranian economic infrastructure in retaliation. If that threshold is crossed, the conflict could enter a new and highly destructive phase of reciprocal infrastructure attacks that would be extremely difficult to de-escalate and could result in severe humanitarian consequences for civilian populations on both sides. The strike on the Beersheba chemical plant is far more than just another incident in this protracted war. It represents a deliberate and sophisticated evolution in Iran's operational doctrine, a move away from high-visibility strikes on cities designed for maximum psychological effect toward calculated economic warfare intended to make the conflict progressively more costly and unsustainable for Israel and its allies over the long term. This strategic shift is designed to alter the cost-benefit calculation for continued Israeli and American operations against Iran. By deliberately hitting facilities that support agriculture, industry, and hazardous waste management, Iran is compelling Israel to divert valuable resources and attention away from purely military objectives and toward the protection of its economic backbone. The response that unfolds in the next 24 to 48 hours will be pivotal. Will Israel limit its retaliation to strictly military targets, or will it mirror Iran's approach by striking Iranian economic infrastructure? How will the United States balance its strong support for Israel with the urgent need to prevent a wider regional war that could severely disrupt global energy supplies and international commodity markets? The answers to these questions will largely determine whether the current conflict remains relatively contained or spirals into a prolonged and highly destructive war of mutual infrastructure attrition. Iran's new target strategy marks a significant evolution in the character and nature of the war. It demonstrates a regime that is adapting intelligently under intense military pressure, transitioning from largely reactive city strikes to proactive economic targeting. It forces Israel into increasingly difficult defensive and offensive choices, and it raises the overall risk level for the entire region by broadening the scope of what both sides consider legitimate targets. The coming weeks and months will reveal whether this strategic shift ultimately succeeds in deterring further Israeli strikes, or instead provokes a stronger and more comprehensive response that accelerates the cycle of escalation. What is already clear, however, is that the war has entered a more complex, more dangerous, and potentially more protracted phase in which economic infrastructure has become a primary battlefield alongside traditional military targets. Let me know in the comments. Do you believe Iran's shift toward industrial and chemical targets is a smart long-term strategy? How should Israel respond to the Beersheba strike? Could this new approach lead to a dangerous and self-reinforcing cycle of infrastructure attacks that becomes nearly impossible to stop? If you want deeper dives into the specific missile systems used in these strikes, the detailed economic impact on Israel's agriculture and industry, the growing role of proxy forces in supporting this strategy, or direct comparisons with Iran's earlier targeting patterns, please drop your requests in the comments below. Thank you for watching World Conflict Report. We will continue to bring you factual, in-depth, and unbiased coverage as this rapidly evolving story continues to develop. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss critical updates. Stay informed, stay safe,